Okay, thanks for watching. So after doing the 3 Lori Vallow videos, and also after seeing the verdict in the trial, I do have some final thoughts about Lori Vallow, and also really thoughts about how much do NPD people really fall into absolute delusions, or how much is it just sort of buying into bullshit or just being full of shit? How much, where does the NPD really fall on the scale of belief or delusion or just being full of shit? Okay, or just bullshit, because there is such a thing as denial, and denial is something that does affect our sense of reality. So I was left with that question after watching the verdict, and even after the videos that I did, I still ask myself, does Lori believe really this, or is it a delusion, or is it just bullshit, or is she just faking, or she just can't accept what she did? I mean, maybe a little bit of everything is true. All of that, all of the above may be true, but definitely, it made me think because I just cannot escape. I cannot escape the belief that first of all, she is mentally ill. Okay. I don't know if it's all just personality disorder. I don't know if it's personality disorder with some delusion, some kind of, I would say, midlife crisis breakdown. Something really cracked. I mean, and I think she was a person who was on the verge of cracking probably since she was a very young person. It's just that the stress of middle age, maybe just getting tired of dealing with kids, and knowing that she was, she had a relation, she had a marriage that was ending, and just reached her limit. Just with the middle age stress, middle age midlife crisis, basically. Something did crack. I mean, she's not all together. I mean, there's no question. But I'm still left with that question that I think applies to all people with cluster B, NPD, ASPD, BPD. Really, how much do we really believe our bullshit? How much do we sometimes actually fall into absolute delusion? Or is there something maybe in between that could really teach us about, cluster B? And so what I'd like to talk about here in this video is what I think is something that is not given enough attention in psychology, which is kind of the magical side of life. Okay. The magical side of life is the side of life where things are charming or fascinating, and how we get absorbed into fascinating and charming things. Okay. So, for example, like say fashion. When there's a new fashion, some people, they get really into it, but how much are they just absorbed into it? Or let's say if you move to another part of the country and people have a different accent, you kind of fall in love with the accent, and then suddenly you're sort of acting like you're from there, but you're really not. Is that that's kind of falling into the fascination. But how much you fall into it. You know. And I really think that the analogies from magic are very useful, because I think that these really are, in a sense, kind of spells, and you sort of fall into the spell. Whenever a guy watches porn or thinks he falls in love with a really good looking girl, how much of that is a spell? It just kind of occupies the mind, kind of captures the mind. You sort of fall into the spell. Obviously, some people fall into spells more easily than others. They're more like suckers, chumps, whatever. And other people, some people more easily, some people not so much. And I think that right there really points to some kind of neurological weakness, or susceptibility, where in the cluster B, the world is a little more magical, and so you fall more into the spell of the magic. And of course, I'm not talking about, believe me, I'm not talking about supernatural magic. I'm just talking about the magic experience. Experiencing life as magical, and sometimes maybe falling too much into the spell of whatever fascinates us, whatever charms us. And yeah, some of us are more easily melted, and we fall more easily into you know. It's like you just fall into the spell, you know. And so I guess what I would suggest, looking at Lori Vallow and this recent true crime case, um, you have to ask yourself, maybe what she experiences is not exactly belief, and it's not exactly delusion, but it's something like in between. And I would think maybe she's fallen into the spell and she's captured by the spell. And then you add into that some ingredients like maybe the denial mechanisms, the stubbornness that, go along with cluster B, very defended on position. You have to be righteous, you're not going to let go, just very, hard gripping. But you have to wonder, maybe what's going on with Lori is not really belief, it's not really delusion, but it could just be she's fallen completely into the spell, whatever that spell is. And of course, maybe she kind of doesn't want to let go, or she's kind of, she kind of knows there would be a terrible shame if she loosened her grip on that. But it does make me wonder if maybe when we talk about cluster B, we should talk much more about the magical phenomenon of, for some people. Some people, the world is a little more magical, or when things get fascinating, they're very magical, and Lori was exactly doing that. She was getting involved in all this end of the world prepper kind of stuff, BS, whatever. But for her, that was really, in line with what she was taught about, Mormon theology and the end of the world. And so, it wasn't like crazy to her. And also it was very magical because she would play, a very important role in, the 144,000, the people that were chosen to survive the end of the world, whatever. So, I would look at, maybe she saw Chad, through the eyes of like magic, in the sense that he was a very magical, very captivating person with a lot of captivating fantasy. And I think it wasn't like she believed it. It wasn't like she got delusional. It was like she got trapped in the spell. And I think the analogy is much closer to, let's say, a guy who watches certain pornography and he sees a girl very sexy, whatever, and it just grabs the mind. And I don't think it's a question of belief. It's not a question of delusion. Like, say, if a guy watches a pornography video, and he has a fantasy of being with that girl, I don't think he really believes he's going to be with that person at all. But the fantasy is really a gripping state. It's like a spell. You're in the spell. And of course, some people do that with a grain of salt. They kind of have the fantasy, but they kind of have a grain of salt. Other people just get enraptured in the fantasy, and it's just kind of like a transfixed experience. And so I think that for cluster B, I think we need to look much more, give more attention to the psychology and the neurology of a spellbound state where you're spellbound. So it's not exactly a delusion and it's not exactly belief, but it really captures you. And it's probably very similar to sexual fantasy, like in what happens when people watch porn, because it really does capture, and we have to be very honest about that. There are powers, and I think we should be, open to consider the practical magic that really exists in the world. People have magical powers. A very good-looking woman or a good-looking man, a person who has a lot of money, a person who has a lot of status. These are very, very powerful, phenomena. The power that a person has, the status that a person has, the sexual attractiveness, even like, say, rhetorics. People are very good at speaking. We need to consider that there are hypnotic, magical dynamics that really can capture people, so that we can even ask the question, if I hear like a politician saying the things that really push my buttons and saying it in a magical way with magical rhetoric, is this not, again, another example of how I'm captured by the spell of something that's, let's say, analogous to pornography, or let's say the power of a good-looking person, sexual attraction, or the allure of someone who has a lot of status? these powerful magnets that capture us into the spell. Maybe that could be said of, like, say, political, supercharged political rhetoric. It's very powerful. It kind of grips us. And so it's not a question of whether you're deluded. It's not a question of whether you're believing it. It's just you're captured. It sort of resonates, and it's probably very similar to, sexual attraction. Um, have to say religion. When people are very charismatic in the religion, sometimes that really captures people. And I think it's probably not fair to say whether they believe it, whether they're deluded. It's probably just a capture. So I would call it spellbound. Spellbound. And spellbound states can last decades. If I live in the South and I love the accents and I love the style, I might sort of become Southern, and I might do that for 30 years or whatever. That's a spellbound state, and I think we need to really look more into being spellbound, because my guess, my suspicion is that when we're spellbound, I think something neurologically kind of decompensates. We become kind of sort of like revert to like a more infantile state where you're like sucking off the bottle. You're sort of transfixed, absorbed, kind of like a dog being absorbed in the dog bowl. And I think you can see that when a dog is absorbed in his dog bowl, there is a deterioration of the executive mind of the dog, because I just put my finger just a little close to the dog bowl and the dog just goes crazy, starts growling, starts getting, maybe humans, or let's say like a narcissist, when you get into, like, say, a fantasy of who, like, say, an ideal fantasy, it's like you're captured by the spellbound state, like a dog to a dog bowl, and that there must be some, deterioration of the executive, whatever. That's just part of being gripped by the spell, and that may actually be very analogous to the dog, where he's just on the edge of a much more vicious, a vicious state of mind. Similarly, the narcissist. Why do narcissists get so angry when you attack their fantasy? Maybe it's because they're in a spellbound state, which is a compromised state. And so we should look more at the compromise, the deterioration, neurological deterioration of being spellbound. And maybe we should have more mindfulness about that, to maybe try not to be spellbound so much, so that we don't, let's say, lose all our neurological faculties, what little we may have, to be, kind of, to have deliberation, to really think for ourselves, because otherwise we're just kind of captured by these spells, and we're really, really not operating with a full neurological capacity. That's my guess. So I wish that psychology would study more kind of the phenomenon of being spellbound, and really what it does and how it compromises our mental functioning. And I think we should be, very liberal and very generous about bringing, just an honest talk about the phenomenology of practical magic and the powers that people have in rhetoric and attractiveness and status, wealth, whatever. These are things that, maybe for some are maybe, more immune than others, but it has a real contagious effect. And I think that spellbound state really has probably more compromise of the neurology than we really would guess. So we really, really, really should think about that more. So I guess, just to end this, I personally think that the spellbound state is very important, in understanding NPD. I think NPDs maybe live in almost like a permanent state of spellbound, where they're kind of spellbound by their own ideals, but so much, that it really does amount to a compromise of the mental functioning, the neurological functioning. And so I'm just thinking that, Lori Vallow, there probably was some denial in there. There probably was, maybe there is a fear of letting go of her belief, or her, whatever, her spellbound state. But I do think that really she is kind of in the grip of a spell, a spell that she really loves, and she really kind of feels she belongs to. And that really has captured her. And that, yeah, with a little bit of denial, maybe a little bit of stubbornness, but I do think that would explain, combined with the midlife crisis, whatever, but that might explain how she really had a deteriorated mental state, and was really kind of on the edge of viciousness, like a dog with a dog bowl, absorption. So, yeah.